The duty sergeant was on night shift at Hopkinsville police station. All was fairly quiet, when all of a sudden an entire family burst in through the front door and hurried up to the front desk. The story they frantically told him was out of this world, literally. He laughed with amusement only to see that the family members stood before him shaking and visibly traumatised. The sergeant couldn't possibly know that what had just went down would be the most well-documented case of alien visitation in history. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Let's dive down the rabbit hole and get a look at the little green men of Kentucky. The southern state of Kentucky is known for many things. For me, it's all about the Jack Daniels, and I love me some Jack. Besides that, the bluegrass state, like many other states, is home to many myths and legends, as well as some very strange and unexplained paranormal events. One of the oldest being the sightings of mysterious cryptids similar to Bigfoot. Locals dubbed the creature the Hillbilly Beast. One that really freaks me out is the Fisherville Goatman, or it's sometimes called the Pope Lick creature. This creature is said to be able to mimic a distressed child's voice in order to lure unsuspecting passers-by to their doom. It was a warm summer's night on the 21st of August in 1955. There was a wee stretch of land between the rural communities of Kelly and Hopkinsville in Christian County. On this land sat a small homestead. This household was about to fall victim to a sinister attack by a group of strange creatures. This story is like something out of a sci-fi novel, and it may have figured that way if it were not for the sheer amount of people involved in this well-documented case. The event itself was witnessed by 11 people, consisting of 8 adults and 3 children, and later would involve several members of law enforcement and even the military. For the residents of the house, the events which unfolded were nothing short of terrifying, and as I mentioned earlier, would go on to be the greatest case of extraterrestrial visitation. So, what exactly happened? About 100 yards or so from the main house was a water well. Earlier that night, one of the occupants, Billy Ray Taylor, ventured out to fetch a pail of water. Billy Ray and his wife June were there staying with friends for the weekend. The house itself was owned by the Langford family. Glennie Langford lived there with her 3 children. Glennie had 2 older sons from the previous marriage, Elmer Sutton, who went by the name Lucky, and John Charlie Sutton, also known as JC. It was the 2 older lads that Billy Ray was friends with. Lucky and JC were there with their own wives, Vera and Elaine. Elaine's brother, O.P. Baxter, had also came to the house to join them all for a late dinner. In total, this would make up the 11 people within the house. As Billy Ray walked towards the well, which, as I said, was about 100 yards walk from the main house, he dropped the bucket into the water and took a moment to admire his surroundings. The homestead was enveloped with thick, lush woodland, and it was then that he noticed a shiny metallic object hovering just above the tree line. It was reflecting the sunlight. He would later say that it looked like it was coming down in an arced path into the trees and had left a multicoloured trail as it fell. It was something that Billy Ray had never seen before. It was smooth and almost cigar-shaped. It had no wings that he could see and was utterly silent. It soon vanished down behind the tree line, which was followed by a dull thud. It was clear, or at least to Billy Ray, that whatever the craft was, it just crashed about half a mile away from the property. Billy Ray excitedly pulled the pail of water back up from the well and hurried back to the house. He told the people inside of what he had just seen. Bearing in mind it was the 50s in the south, so you can imagine their reaction when he blurted out that he had just seen a spaceship. Of course, everyone burst out laughing. It was like the boy who cried wolf, because Lucky and Billy Ray were famous for playing all kinds of pranks on each other. But this time, Billy Ray was not laughing. Sensing his agitation, the group soon curbed their laughter and started to come up with their own explanations. They suggested that maybe it was a meteor or a shooting star. Billy Ray insisted that someone come to the well with him, a task that his friend Lucky agreed to carry out. He wanted to show Lucky the exact area where this supposed spaceship had crashed. Surely they would go out and at the very least see some smoke over the tree line. Both lads then ventured out. By this time it was dark, and although it was difficult to see anything out there, they could still make out the tree line, and it was clear that there were no signs of smoke or anything else to suggest that a flying saucer had landed nearby. Lucky wanted to believe his friend, because he had never seen him act like this before. If it was a prank, then Billy Ray was acting his ass off. They eventually gave it up and agreed to return to the house. Food was almost ready, and it was time to eat. As they were walking back to the house, they heard a crackling noise from the trees, like branches breaking. They both turned and could see a dull, glowing object. It was fairly low to the ground, and in fact almost on the ground, and it was moving towards them. They would later say that the glow wasn't like that of a flashlight, it was more akin to a lantern if anything else, yet it seemed formless. The men stood watching as the object moved closer towards them, and only when it got to within 20 or so feet, both men were overcome by a sudden feeling of dread. Both of them could clearly see what it was that they were looking at. They could not believe their eyes. They both looked at each other in disbelief before turning back and staring at the figure. It was a small humanoid with a bulbous head, short legs and long arms. It also had what would appear to be almost like pointy ears protruding from each side of its head. They could tell that the glow was coming from the creature's large oval-shaped eyes. I mean, this is freaky enough, right? I'm really not sure what I would do in that situation. Probably shite my pants. But what really set the lads on edge was the fact that the creature was still moving towards them. Only it wasn't walking at all, it was hovering, less than a foot above the ground. That was it. Time to go. Both men ran shouting and swearing back into the house, slamming the door behind them. As they stood there in the hallway out of breath, Glennie had gotten up from sitting with her guests and approached the two almost like she was about to chastise them. She asked what on earth was going on. Lucky told her that something strange had just come out of the woods and that they all should stay inside. Of course, she didn't believe any part of the story. She actually thought that Billy Ray had gotten Lucky outside and then they hatched a plan or a scheme to play a joke on everyone. So she was having none of this. She understandably didn't want the kids to get scared. Lucky immediately went and fetched his 12-gauge shotgun. He handed Billy Ray a .22 hunting rifle and told him to guard the back door whilst he watched the front. Glennie was getting a wee bit annoyed now. This joke was going way too far. As she was about to tell Billy Ray to put the rifle back, she suddenly let out a piercing scream. Standing just beyond the back porch was a small figure, and it was standing on the ground. Billy Ray fired a shot which went through the screen door and hit the figure, sending it rolling onto the ground. They would later say that when the bullet hit it, it made the same noise as if it was hitting metal. The creature then hopped up and moved off at great speed into the trees. At this point, many of the house guests were drawn to the commotion. Billy Ray, feeling brave, stepped out into the doorway, all the while keeping his aim focused on the area of trees where the creature had escaped to. All of a sudden, and to the total horror of witnesses, a spindly hand reached down from the porch roof and made a grab for Billy Ray's hair. Eileen was standing immediately behind him and grabbed him and yanked him back into the house. Everyone was screaming. In that instant, Lucky leapt out onto the rear porch and started firing shots up onto the roof where the creature's hand was just spotted. Just like the last, the creature fell off the roof with a metallic sound before hopping off into the woods, seemingly uninjured. Once everyone was back inside, JC joined the others after fetching his 20-gauge shotgun. At this point, no one knew who or what these strange creatures could be. All they knew for sure was that there was more than one of them, and bullets didn't have any effect. Glennie was very religious, so she naturally thought that they were demons. Lucky had said that it could be the cave goblins that were part of another local legend, whilst Billy Ray was saying that it's clearly aliens from the crashed ship that he saw earlier. Whatever was going on, it was far from over. The mumbling and frantic rants of the family were disturbed by yet another ear-piercing scream, but this time it came from the child's bedroom upstairs. The children had come crashing down the stairs, saying that they had seen a strange face with glowing eyes peering at them through the bedroom window. Lucky told his mother to take the children to safety into another room at the rear of the house, and he enlisted the help of JC, and they ran up into the kids' room. Seconds later, there was another scream, as one of the creatures had appeared now at the window of the rear room that the kids and Glennie had just entered. JC ran into the room and fired a shot at the creature, shattering the window. Yet again, the creature simply fell backwards before scrambling out of sight. These menacing attacks would go on for the next few hours, the family would hear footsteps and scratching on the roof and on the porch. If they looked out any of the windows, they would see wee creatures running around the yard and even in the trees. You know what it seems like to me? At any moment an alien parent is going to arrive and shout,
"Right you lot, what have I told you for about fooling around with humans? Get back to the spaceship and you take what you get when your father hears about this."
The strange thing is, well, one of the many strange things about this, is the fact that the creatures never really tried to get into the house. Witnesses said that they just seemed to want to have a look and see what was going on, and worryingly, they seemed more fixated on the children within. Whenever they got too close for comfort, particularly near the room where the kids were gathered, either Lucky or JC would open fire. They estimated that there were around 3 or 4 of these wee visitors, and over the hours in which they were defending their home and their families, the men would fire more than 100 shots. At around 11:30 p.m, when there was a stretch of inactivity and silence from outside, all the inhabitants of the homestead collected themselves and piled into the 2 trucks that were parked just outside. First stop, the police. The duty sergeant couldn't believe his ears. Little green men? Come on lads, you're having a laugh, right? But then his police brain kicked in, and he started thinking, aliens or not, by the family's own admission there had been some sort of gun battle and shots were fired. That in itself needed his attention. So he dispatched officers to the Sutton farm. The entire complement of law enforcement and other agencies that descended on the homestead consisted of 3 sheriff's deputies, 4 city police officers, 5 state troopers, and 4 military police officers from nearby Fort Campbell. An investigation was underway. One thing was apparent right from the offset. Something had definitely happened here. The house looked like a war zone with bullet holes in walls, screen doors had been blasted apart, windows had been shattered by bullet fire, and rounds were embedded in the doors and door frames. Besides the countless shell casings and bullet holes, very little evidence remained of the otherworldly visitors the family claimed to have encountered. Although one of the deputy sheriffs noticed a strange glow coming from the tree line, he quickly grabbed 2 of his colleagues and they swiftly went out there to investigate. But this too yielded nothing. At the exact spot where Lucky had fired and hit one of the creatures, investigators came across a stain that gave off an odd sheen, but for some reason they were unable to collect a sample. During subsequent interviews with all present, the families all maintained the original story and did not deviate from their account of the incident. They all described the same creatures in the exact same way. They carried out routine door-to-door inquiries with the Suttons' neighbours, many of whom said that they had also seen strange lights in the woods at that time, but they just figured that the Suttons were using flashlights whilst searching for one of the pigs that might have escaped. They also confirmed hearing gunshots, but again they assumed that they were just firing on a predator like a bobcat and might have been on the property worrying the livestock. The authorities wrapped up the investigation for now. They had spoken to all the witnesses, spoke with the neighbours and searched extensively. At this stage, there was not much else that could be done. The next day word got out. Several neighbours had went across to the farmhouse, some out of pure curiosity wanting to hear what the hell had gone on the night before. Others wanted to ensure that the family was okay. However, when locals turned up at the Sutton farm, they found no one at home. The place was empty. This was because, in the wee hours of the morning, after everything had calmed down and the authorities left the scene, the families all went to bed. By this time it was around 3:30 a.m. Just as they were getting settled, Glennie had encountered yet another creature's face at the window. It would seem that they had returned. Thankfully, as morning was swiftly approaching, there were no more sightings of the strange beings, but not willing to take any more chances, all inhabitants of the homestead packed up their belongings and bundled into their trucks, leaving the farm in the rearview mirror. Of course, word soon spread and the national media got involved. Newspapers, news outlets from across the country were trying to make sense of this story. Like most people with nothing to hide, the Suttons were open and honest about what had taken place, but soon it was apparent that the journalists and reporters were not really interested in the truth. They just wanted to mock and ridicule them. This made the witnesses shy away from the media attention and refused to comment any further. For years, heck, decades after this incident, The family and friends that were there that night have remained shut off. In the 67 years there have been a few occasions where the media have been able to speak to them. It's abundantly apparent that the story was not changed, not one bit of it, despite it having been so long. Their account of what happened that night back in 1955 has remained absolute. A few months after the incident, Glennie and her family would move out of the home and out of the area. The constant barrage of journalists, UFO hunters and fanatics descending on their property and intruding into their private lives was just all too much. But that's not the only intrusion that struck them with fear. They were also afraid that the creatures would return. In the 67 years since, this case has been known as the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter and the Kelly Little Green Men. Like any claims of alien encounters, abductions and stuff like that, the majority of responses are that of scepticism. Although the Hopkinsville PD dealing with the case have all gone on record to say that whatever happened that night, they're in no doubt whatsoever that the Suttons and their friends went through something. The fear and alarm was 100% real, no doubt. Skeptics would go on to say that it was an alcohol-fueled delusion. The Committee for Skeptical Inquiry were approached for comment, and a member called Joe Nickel went on record in saying that he believed it to be nothing more than a pair of mating great horned owls. Now, I'll be the first to admit, these owls are large for sure, and have these wee horny ear things that certainly do fit the descriptions of the beings. They even have big yellow eyes. Also, they are known to fly fairly silently, which could explain the notion that the creatures were floating above the ground. I could see people being sceptical if there were one or two witnesses to a brief event, but there were 11 people in that house, and it went on for hours. Even if all the adults were steaming drunk, and they encountered anything that they assumed were aliens, that's gonna sober you up faster than a toupee in a hurricane. There's a few good reasons why I would say that the great horned owls are not responsible for this. It's known that if they feel threatened, then, yeah, they will attack or scare off anyone by swooping. But this is usually from a great height. They wouldn't be running around in the yard. Secondly, they wouldn't be trying to grab at Billy Ray's head. And thirdly, and more importantly, owls are not bulletproof. Skeptics then fall back on explanations like mass hysteria, or that they simply just made it all up for financial gain. The cops found no evidence to suggest that the family were intoxicated that night. Also, with regards to the financial gain, well, they never made any money from the story. And why would they effectively destroy their own home and put themselves through ridicule, all in the name of a hoax and the possibility of maybe making a quick buck or two? The repair costs alone would have been substantial. Neighbours and friends that knew the family all vouched for them, saying that they were not prone to fabricating stories, never mind one of this magnitude. The Suttons just wanted to be done with it all and move on with their lives. They've been quoted as saying that they believe they were the victims of something which neither they or the people at large fully understand, and that they just want to live with it. I'll be honest with you folks, I've got my own personal views on this case, and a few like it. Whilst doing my research for this video, I went down the alien rabbit hole. Man, that's a phrase I never thought I would say, alien rabbit hole. I'm going to put forth my views and what I really think about it all, but first we need to visit another story. This one is from 2012, also in Kentucky. Did the wee green men return? In the coming days we'll find out when my concluding video on this case goes live. I sure hope you guys tune in. In the meantime, stay safe out there folks. Watch out for wee green men, but more than that remember, keep smiling.